Chapter 11 of Christianity in the Apostolic Age. Christianity in the Apostolic Age by George Purves. The Missionary Journey of Paul and Barnabas. Paragraph 117. Antioch soon became the point of departure for a greater expansion of the faith than any yet known. This originated in a revelation of the Spirit made to 5 prophets and teachers of that church. Acts 13, 1 and 2. 4 of them, Barnabas, Simeon Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, and Paul, were Hellenistic Jews. The 5th had once been the foster brother or comrade, Detzman, Bible Estudienne, page 178, of Herod Antipas, and may have been a Jew likewise. The point to be noted is that they belonged to the circle which had already taken the deepest interest in the expansion of the faith. To them, as they worshiped, the Spirit gave the command, "Separate me, Barnabas and Saul, to the work whereunto I have called them." And forthwith the 2 missionaries were set apart by the laying on of hands to their new mission. Paragraph 118. The work itself was undesignated, but there could be no doubt that it was to be among the Gentiles. This, of course, did not exclude work among the Jews. The synagogues were the first places in which the missionaries began to preach, and through them, indeed, they could best reach the Gentiles. But the work was not to be limited to the Jews, and it was to be carried on in Gentile lands. No explicit program, however, was furnished. The messengers of Messiah were to be guided by the Spirit and by providence. Nor may they at first have appreciated the magnitude of their enterprise, but went forth in obedience to the divine command. They were sent also by the church, acting in the persons of the 3 remaining prophets and teachers who laid their hands upon the brethren. This did not make Barnabas and Paul apostles of Christ in the technical sense, Galatians 1:1, but it made them apostles of the church, Acts 14, 4 and 14. Their mission was thus both a divine vocation and an enterprise of the Antiochian church. We may believe also that it accorded with an already formed wish of Barnabas and Paul. It was very opportune. The men had been prepared for the work. The work was waiting for the men. The church had been formed which was ready to support the missionaries, and it lay at the gateway of the Roman world. All conspired to make the mission the climax of the progress hitherto attained, and to open the way for further expansion. Paragraph 119. The date of the journey can only be approximately assigned to the period between AD 44 and 50, nor are there any clear indications of the time consumed by it. Ramsay estimates its length at 2 years and 4 months. Church in the Empire, pages 61, 67, and 72. But his reasoning is not demonstrative. Others think it consumed but a single summer. We shall, perhaps, be safe in locating it in 47 and 48. Paragraph 120. The route first taken seems to have been determined by practical considerations. Accompanied by John Mark as a helper, 8:5, the missionaries went from Antioch to its seaport, Seleucia, and thence sailed to Cyprus. This was, doubtless, because Barnabas was from that island. Work, too, had already begun there, 11:19, and the large number of Jews provided the means by which those Gentiles who were influenced by the synagogue might be reached. Landing at Salamis, they preached in the synagogues, and gradually traversed the whole length of the island. No note of their success is given until they reached Paphos at the western extremity of Cyprus. There the proconsul himself, Sergius Paulus, embraced the faith. He had been influenced by Judaism and was interested in religion, but he had fallen under the sway of a Jewish sorcerer, Bar-Jesus, who called himself Elymas, or the wise man, and had a place, apparently, in the proconsul's retinue. When Elymas opposed the missionaries, Paul openly denounced the wickedness of the renegade Jew, and smote him with blindness, 13:8-11, and this sign secured the adhesion of the Roman to the new teaching, 13:12. Luke narrates the incident because, as in the case of Simon Magus, it illustrated the triumph of the faith over those religious impostors who were so prominent a feature of the Roman world in the Apostolic Age. Paragraph 121. From this time Paul, as he is thenceforth called in Acts 13:9, appears as the leader of the campaign, 13:13, 14:12. And it was perhaps at his suggestion that they sailed northward to Perga in Pamphylia. There Mark left them and returned to Jerusalem. His conduct displeased Paul. 15:38. We may conjecture that Mark was unwilling to enter on so bold and large an enterprise as that which the apostle was undertaking in Asia Minor. See Ramsay, St. Paul, etc., page 90, McGiffert, Apostolic Age, page 176. Whether the unwillingness arose from personal or theoretical motives does not appear. It again evidences the devotion of Barnabas, that in spite of his kinsman's return, he was ready to go forward. The stay at Perga, however, was for some unknown reason brief, and we find the party immediately advancing northward, probably along the Cestrus and by way of Adaba, Ramsay, Church in Empire, page 19, to Pisidian Antioch, 13:14, a city of Phrygia lying toward the Pisidian border, which was then the military center of the southern part of the province of Galatia. The journey was a rough and perilous one. In it may perhaps be located some of the dangers mentioned in 2 Corinthians 11:26-27. But in Pisidian Antioch the missionaries reached a place of large importance. Paul had, probably, long had it in mind as the center of the province lying north of his own Cilicia, and it also was a numerous colony of Jews. By visiting it, Paul followed his well-known policy of seizing the chief centers of population and influence. Paragraph 122. The work in Pisidian Antioch began as usual in the synagogue, and Paul's address, Acts 13:16-41, aroused at once the interest of both the Jews and the devout Gentiles who were present. It is worthy of special notice as being the earliest recorded teaching of the apostle. 1. In it he first reviewed briefly the history of Israel, 16-25, to show that God's purpose culminated in the sending of a Savior, even Jesus, whom John the Baptist had specifically declared to be Messiah. This part of the address is like Stephen's in its historical point of view, but it follows quite a different line of thought, bringing out the sovereign power and plan of God in Hebrew history and setting Jesus forth as the Christ of promise. Its closing words show that the mission of the Baptist was well known among the Jews of the dispersion. Compare also 18:25, 19:8. And illustrate Paul's familiarity with the teaching of John as it is given in the Gospels. Compare verses 24-25 with E9, Luke 3:15-16, John 1:20-27. 2. The address next recounted, 26-37, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Both his death and resurrection were in precise accord with prophecy, and demonstrated him to be the one through whom the promises to Israel will be fulfilled. In this section we are reminded of Peter's speeches at and after Pentecost. Compare verse 27 with 3:17, 2:23, 3:18, verse 28 with 3:13, verses 33-35 with 2:27, verse 37 with 2:31. But the material is such as would have been naturally common to both preachers. There are also characteristic Pauline ideas. The ignorance of the Jews displayed in the rejection of Jesus. Compare 1 Corinthians 2:8, 1 Timothy 1:13. The Lord's burial. Compare 1 Corinthians 15:4. His repeated appearances to the original disciples, 1 Corinthians 15:5-7, are elsewhere emphasized by Paul. That he does not here appeal to Christ's appearance to himself is natural, since he was addressing strangers, and the primary point was to appeal to the original witnesses in Jerusalem. This, too, is in accord with his method as described by him in 1 Corinthians 15:5-7. Paragraph 123. 3. The close of the address, 38-41, strikes a still more decidedly Pauline note. Like Peter, Acts 2:38, 5:31, 10:43. but also using a form of expression found in his own epistles. Ephesians 1:7, Colossians 1:14, compare Romans 4:7, and Acts 26:18. He declared that through Jesus forgiveness of sins was offered to them. But he went further. As every Jew would agree, salvation consists in the declaration by God that before him a man is righteous. This, Paul said, is now possible. In Jesus, every believer is justified, and, as he puts it with great emphasis on the word all, is justified from all things from which he could not be justified by the law of Moses. This may be regarded as an appeal to his hearers' consciousness that the law did not secure to them real reconciliation with God, but only an apparent and unsatisfying merit. Compare Romans 10:38, Philippians 3:6 and 9. Or it may be understood as a declaration that they could not by the law, while they could by faith, be completely justified. In either case, the idea is entirely Pauline. Compare Vint, Apostelgeschichte. The warning also against their probable unbelief is again after Paul's manner. 2 Thessalonians 2:14 and 16, Romans 9-11. While offering Jesus to the Jews, he realized fully that the nation as such, like the rulers in Jerusalem, would reject him. Paragraph 124. This address then furnishes the first glimpse into the apostle's thought and method as a preacher. Luke's report is, of course, an abstract and contains traces of his own style and vocabulary. Yet, as in other cases, he preserves the thought, and in great measure the diction of the speaker. The address was certainly adapted to the mixed audience that heard it. We should not regard Paul's epistles as representative of his ordinary method of preaching. His speeches in Acts exhibit a versatility and adaptation which testify to both the authenticity of the reports and the power of the apostle. We may infer also, from allusions in the epistles, that his preaching was varied and practical as well as argumentative, e.g., 1 Thessalonians 1:9 and 10, 3:4, Galatians 3:1, 1 Corinthians 2:1-5. Here, the historical introduction was calculated to awake the confidence of his hearers in him as a loyal Hebrew. His presentation of Jesus, by emphasizing the fulfillment of prophecy and the power of God in the resurrection, was suited to make the deepest impression. His conclusion appealed to the longing of the human heart, whether Jew or Gentile, for real salvation. At the same time, the thought moves entirely in the circle of Pauline teaching as we know it from the epistles. Salvation lies in justification before God. Faith alone is its condition. The death and resurrection of Christ are the means whereby salvation has been accomplished and certified. These were the leading truths which Paul taught in his epistles. We find him already teaching them in Antioch, while his intimation, verse 39, that the law cannot save, shows that he stood on the ground on which he was destined soon to fight the battle of Christian liberty and defend the sufficiency of Jesus' work. Paragraph 125. The favorable impression produced by the address brought a larger concourse, especially of Gentiles, to the synagogue on the next Sabbath. This, however, awakened the anger of the Jews, who feared the loss of their own influence. Hence, Paul and Barnabas were led to declare that their responsibility to the Jews was at an end, and that they would turn to the Gentiles. It is the first known time that this course was taken by them, but it is a typical example of their method. Unlike the gradual way in which the Palestinian disciples separated from the synagogue, in these foreign regions the separation was usually rapid. A Christian community arose in Pisidian Antioch which was mainly Gentile, and between which and the synagogue antagonism at once began. The synagogue possessed, of course, the greater influence in the city. It was especially influential among the women. Compare Josephus, B.J. 2:22. And women occupied a prominent position in the society. and even in the political and official life of the cities of Asia Minor. Ramsay, Church and Empire, page 67. Through these agencies the civil authorities were arrayed against the missionaries, and the latter were expelled. They went to Iconium, leaving behind them a considerable body of believers. Paragraph 126. Iconium was another Frisian city, and lay about 80 miles southeast of Antioch, near the border of Lycaonia. Ramsay has made it probable that in this journey Paul and Barnabas followed one of the great Roman roads which traversed the provinces and united them for military and commercial purposes. Church and Empire, page 27. The work in Iconium was like that in Antioch, and was attended with equal success. The Jews, however, again made trouble, and when the work had progressed for some time, 14:8, so that the city was divided between the two parties, threatened another persecution from the authorities. Thereupon the missionaries passed over into Lycaonia and visited the two cities of Lystra and Derbe. This was not, however, a mere flight for safety into an unimportant region. Lystra, which lay 18 miles southwest from Iconium, was a Roman colony and a military center. Church and Empire, page 47. And though the site of Derbe is still unidentified, it was probably an important place on the southeastern frontier of the province of Galatia. Ibid, page 54. The missionaries, therefore, still sought centers of influence, and though everywhere facing persecution, steadily pursued their plan. Paragraph 127. Their stay in Lystra was made notable by Paul's healing a lame man, Acts 14:8, etc. The miracle had the effect of persuading the populace that the foreign Greek-speaking visitors were none other than the gods Zeus and Hermes, and the priest of the temple of Zeus, before the city was about to offer to them sacrifices. This was truly a new and unexpected form of misunderstanding, and gave occasion for a new style of address from Paul's lips. 14:15-18. He bravely proclaimed in the face of idolatry the one living and true God, the Creator and Governor of all, the beneficent author of that nature which heathenism blindly worshipped. Again, the report is a mere abstract, but it bears its substantial authenticity on its face. Though there is not a word in it of the way of salvation, it is strikingly accordant with Paul's expressions elsewhere. Compare verse 15 with 1 Corinthians 8:4, Romans 1:20-28, 2 Thessalonians 1:9, verse 16 with Acts 17:26, Romans 1:24, 3:25, verse 17 with Romans 1:20, and reveals the broad basis of natural religion on which his specifically Christian teaching rested. It illustrates also his power of adaptation to his audience. It is probable that during the visit to Lystra Timothy was converted. On Paul's next visit, 16:1, he found this young disciple well reported of by the brethren, and took him for a companion. He always speaks of Timothy as one of his own converts. 1 Timothy 1:2-18, 2 Timothy 1:2-2:1, and reminds him later in life of the perils he had undergone at this time. 2 Timothy 3:10-11. It is natural to infer, therefore, that Timothy was converted during this visit. He must have been very young. His Jewish mother Eunice had married a Gentile, but had trained her son in the scriptures of her race. Acts 16:3, 2 Timothy 1:5, 3:15. He had, however, not been circumcised. Perhaps his mixed blood made him specially sympathize with the Hebrew preacher to the Gentiles. Paul's affectionate references to Timothy's mother and grandmother, 1 Timothy 1:5, suggest also that the persecuted missionary found in them receptive listeners and warm friends, and perhaps in their house a home. Paragraph 129. The work in Lystra was, however, interrupted by Jews from Antioch and Iconium, who followed the missionaries and persuaded the populace against them. Where Paul had been offered worship, he was now dragged out of the city and stoned. Acts 14:19. Happily he was not killed, and on the next day left with Barnabas for Derbe. Nothing is said of the work in Derbe except that disciples were made. The missionaries had now reached the limit of South Galatia, and determined to return to Syrian Antioch with a report of their mission. They might have crossed the mountains southward into Cilicia, and gone by way of Tarsus to Syria, but they did not wish to leave the new converts without further instruction and organization. Hence, in spite of the danger, they resolved to return by the way they had come. It may have been that the danger had decreased, perhaps by the election of new magistrates in the cities of the province. Ramsay, Church and Empire, page 69. But their motive was to revisit the disciples, and this they would have done in the face of danger. So, from Derbe they returned to Lystra, and from Lystra to Iconium, and from Iconium to Pisidian Antioch. They not only encouraged, instructed, and warned the converts, but organized them into churches by the selection and ordination of elders, 1422, in every place. From Pisidian Antioch they returned to Perga. There they stopped to preach, as they had not done on the former visit. Thence they went to the seaport Attalia, and sailed to Syrian Antioch, where they related to the church all things that God had done with them, and how he had opened a door of faith unto the Gentiles. Acts 14:27, R.V. Paragraph 130. As we review this first missionary tour, we may observe the principles on which Paul and Barnabas acted. A. Their plan was, in general, to move westward, into the regions next beyond those already occupied. It would be too much to say that Paul as yet contemplated the winning of the empire to the faith. They doubtless went to Cyprus because it was the home of Barnabas, and then to Phrygia and Lycaonia because they lay just beyond Cilicia, where Paul had lived and worked. But their purpose pointed westward, and thus may indicate that they sought instinctively to carry the new religion into the civilized Roman world. B. Their policy was to begin in the chief cities of each district, since these were the centers of influence. C. They established in each city an organized church, by the constitution of which the life of the disciples would be fostered. D. They always offered the gospel first to the Jews, thus never forgetting the claims of Israel. But their churches were mixed. In most of them Gentiles predominated, and in them all Jew and Gentile stood on an equal footing. In none was observance of the Mosaic law regarded as necessary. E. We should assume also that everywhere they carried the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, instructed the converts in the beliefs and duties of the new religion, and laid a broad foundation for subsequent Christian life. These details are barely hinted at in our meager reports, but Paul's conduct in his other journeys leaves no doubt as to his method. Paragraph 131. Finally, it should be noted that in the universal spread of the Greek language, and in the Roman government of the provinces, there was an evident providential preparation for their mission, nor had Judaism itself failed to prepare the way. Synagogues were found in all the cities, and in connection with them a large number of Gentiles who had been profoundly impressed by the religion of Jehovah, and from whom most of the converts came. The existence of such devout Gentiles is amply attested by both the Acts 8:16, 43, 50, secular history, and recently deciphered inscriptions. Thus the men and the means, the faith and the world were brought together. The expansion, begun with the death of Stephen, had steadily continued, finding new fields to enter and new men to enter them. With this, the Church's realization of its mission had expanded likewise. In Paul, finally had appeared the man who, by training, experience, and revelation, was prepared to maintain the principles on which the expansion could logically proceed and to carry it onward. End of chapter 11.